Welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black independent podcast creatives and audio professionals. I'm excited to spotlight 28 outstanding indie podcast creatives who have answered the call to be a part of this series. Today, my guest is Claire Murigande. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Talib. I'm fine, thank you.
Awesome. Like I said, I'm really happy that you're here. I really appreciate it. And I want, before we get into the podcast, for people to know a little bit about you.
Sure. So my name is Claire. I currently live in Switzerland. Basically, I spent almost all my life in Switzerland. I was born in Burundi. It's a tiny country in East Africa. And I was born from Rwandan parents. And my family actually lived in Kenya. So I've been a bit around before we moved to Switzerland. And even within Switzerland, I like to say that it's quite a small country, but not many people know that we have 4 official languages. And within that geography, I've moved around as well. So I'm quite a curious person, and I like to be in environments where I challenge myself. Even podcasting was a challenge for me to start, but I think we'll get into that. More from the formal background, I studied biology, so I'm a scientist by training, and I have worked for over a decade within the life science industry. And a few years ago, 2019, so it's about 4 years now, I decided to go back to school and have an MBA because I was really interested and intrigued to understand what's happening with the whole digitization. What does that mean for people, for the industry I was working in? And it opened up new doors for me where I started my entrepreneurship journey slowly by slowly up until now, where I run a podcast now for 2 years. And it's been quite exciting. It's been a lot of work, I will not lie. And I think all the entrepreneurs out there and whoever is doing something independently will resonate with that. But it's been quite exciting and rewarding as well. Meeting so many different people and being here today.
That's awesome, Claire. So you're in Switzerland right now?
Absolutely.
And what time is it?
It is 10:07 p.m.
Thank you so much for your time. I will not keep you, but thank you so much for your time. So definitely, let's jump into it. You started your podcast 2 years ago. Congratulations on starting it and still being here. That's important. And tell us the name of it and your why for starting it.
So the name is Narratives of Purpose. And I have to be honest, I struggled in the beginning to find a name because I was scouting and looking around and I wanted to have something that stands out, but I wanted to speak about people's stories and I wanted them to share their journeys and to inspire others to create a social change. Because when I started, it was really during the pandemic, during the first lockdowns. And the thing I noticed is that people were so flushed with only negative news and constant bad news, but we didn't, or at least people didn't realize or see that other things are happening out there, other positive things and good things and impactful things. So I thought, okay, let me just take a handful of people I know. And then perhaps if it grows and resonates, I will continue with people I'm following and eventually people I don't know. And the idea was to say, starting from yourself, from the individual, you can really have a greater impact than you believe. And this has been really the red thread throughout all the stories that I've been sharing, is that I wanted to have this personal angle, so the angle of the individual, to say it starts with me, be it your own experience, whether you've been through hardship, whatever it is, but then you notice that you can actually bring something to the collective. And just starting what you do, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a business. I also stumbled upon social entrepreneurship, something I didn't know about. But for me, it makes sense because it's like you can support livelihoods, you can make money, have a business, but still care for people and the planet. And it just opened a new door for me. And I realized that this part of having storytelling and sharing individual journeys, individual stories is actually what's quite appealing for me personally. And I thought, listen, if it works for me, it might work for a handful of people out there. And as you said, it's been 2 years. It's been incredible because I started with people that I know, as I said before. And slowly by slowly, so, someone heard about this and some guests have been also great advocates of the show, and it's just expanding. And I have been speaking to people that had personally no idea they even existed, but I'm so amazed by what they're doing. So it's Narratives of Purpose. And the idea is to amplify social impact and really inspire people to take action, whether it's in their community or even at a larger scale.
Wow, that's awesome. I definitely resonate with that. I say this thing often, if it's to be, it's up to me, right? If we have an idea, if we have something that we want to put out there, it's up to us to get it done. And so I definitely resonate with that. And thank you for sharing that. When it comes to Switzerland and your podcast community, are there a lot of people in Switzerland that are podcasters?
There are a few, but I'll be honest, the podcast communities and groups and collective I'm more involved with and connected with, and from whom I learn the more, are outside of Switzerland. So I think it's probably, but that's my interpretation, it's probably also due to the geography and the language fragmentation of the country. So we have the French-speaking part and the Western part, which is actually where I grew up, but now I live in the German-speaking part. So you need to be a part of a language community. We have 4 official languages, but I would say rather 3 that are spoken every day. My first question was, should I do this in French, in German, or even in English? Because I thought if I do it in German, some people won't understand. If I do it in French, not everyone would understand. So I went for English, which was the best because I thought not only it will be understood by everyone in Switzerland, but also outside of Switzerland. And I guess that's what also helped me be more involved with other groups and collectives. I'm part of a group of women podcasters where the collective is based in the UK, but it's actually international. There is, I would say, a few pockets here and there in Switzerland, but then you have to know them. It's not a larger community, but you can know maybe a handful of people and then exchange individually, but it's not really a group. And I have to say, one of this group I'm part of, I also have some Swiss podcasters in there. So that's quite interesting. It's yeah, and I think as well, podcasting is more advanced in the English-speaking realm, so US obviously, and then in the UK, and also on the African continent. But then that's another story because there's so many different languages as well. But I think if you do it in English, the odds are that you'll probably be in an international group and not very local.
That's great information and great insight. And I asked that question because our community and where we're based and Americans in general, we tend to be very focused and we think that this is the only thing that exists, right? And there's so much outside of America, United States, and that's going on in different countries and different continents. And so I think it's great that we understand what's going on. One, because it's an equal opportunity for contribution and support and understanding. So thank you so much for sharing that. When you started your podcast, you started with, like you said, a few people that you knew, and then it began to expand. So how did the intention come around about expansion and finding the other guests on your podcast?
So I was quite surprised in the beginning after I think a few episodes, maybe 6 or 7, like halfway through my first season, I had recommendation from people who either heard my podcast, who knew me, or even the guests that had been on the podcast. It's, oh, you should speak to this person and so on. So it organically grew. And at the same time, I was really shaping more and more this idea, how I want it to look like, who I want to have on, what topics I want to address, because this is the other thing is that I had quite some challenges in the beginning. And by challenge, I'm having perhaps trouble explaining to people, okay, it's not niche. I'm not speaking only about healthcare because this is where I come from, but I want to expand it. For me, social impact or social change encompasses so many different things. Obviously, there's health, there's healthcare, but one important aspect is also education. And there's inclusion, and in inclusion you can put lots of things. So I wanted to make sure that any topic that for me was important, I'll be able to address it. And that's how I went on out to look at different guests, potential guests, and so on. So being of curious nature, looking at things and listening to podcasts myself, I have to say that some of the guests I had also heard on other podcasts, and I just thought, let me just reach out to them. You never know. And most of the time it really worked, which was quite surprising because I thought, listen, it's an independent podcast. Maybe some people don't even know where Switzerland is. And who am I? The intention can be good, but you need to have a sort of recommendation. So the fact that people were starting to speak about what I was doing and that I can reach out to my own network was quite helpful. But the idea really was to say, okay, which topics do I want to address? And who do I think is a relevant person in that area, be it locally, because obviously my largest audience is in Switzerland because this is where I'm based. But interestingly enough, like the second largest is in the US. I was quite surprised. And so I thought, okay, let me look at people in these regions, in these geographies. And myself, having my heritage and my background and my roots in Africa, it was absolutely like imperative to also bring those voices, because this is something I realize is, the scale this might take. It's been 2 years. It's great. I'm hoping it can be even bigger, but at least my voice is out there. It was like, I also need to represent or to show a lot of who I am, even if it's through different people. So I've had people from East Africa, from West Africa, from South Africa, from Mauritius, just to show that with this international background, but also multicultural background, actually it's important to listen to different voices because you have different perspectives. And you never know, because even if you are right now in the US and I'm in Switzerland. We never met before, but through podcasting, we have something that's connecting us. And people don't probably realize it all the time, is that we are actually interconnected. And just the fact of listening to different voices and different stories, I could relate to someone perhaps who is from India, but I never met them. And just the way they're telling their stories probably reminds me of the way I grew up, maybe things I went through in this country and I can relate to. And for me, that's really the most important aspect as well. That's why storytelling works. So I really decided, okay, what are the topics? Who is active there? And how can I make it as broad as possible in terms of bringing different voices, really be myself inclusive, because if I'm speaking about inclusion and I'm just taking people from Switzerland, it doesn't make sense. So that's the whole story I have, how I've been building this.
That's awesome. And what would you say out of your interviews and the way that you have chosen to approach your podcast have been your biggest takeaways, whether it's from a guest or just the expansion of the podcast itself? What do you think you've even learned about yourself inside of podcasting?
Wow, that's an interesting question. About myself, I would say, I think I already knew it, but this was another proof or another way to show it, is that whenever I have an idea, I'm going to make it happen. As complicated as can be, like you were just speaking before about, you had this idea to have 28 podcasters, one every day during a month. I had this idea a few months back to say, okay, now I'm going to do a different format. And I'm just now in the midst of editing and producing with someone helping me. And I'm thinking, what was my idea? It's like you have this vision, and then as long as I have this end goal, I will just go for it. Sometimes I don't even know how I'll get there, but the fact of thinking, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Maybe I can speak to a person here and there. I can ask a question. So I think I learned that any idea that I can have, actually, I can make it happen. I knew it, but this is like an additional proof, another way, right? Especially in the creative realm, because being a scientist, even though science and creativity is similar, but I was more used to have something that's really in a specific core frame and fix and so on. But this time was like, okay, you can have the idea and you can actually make it happen. That was one learning about myself. And from my guests, I think I wasn't sure, but I thought about the power of connection and bringing people together. So the guests and the audience as well. And this actually worked. So some people did connect, like some guests after someone listened to an episode and I introduced them and they're like, okay, great, we can collaborate. I'm making it simple here, but just to show you that it's not individual stories, which are not connected even within them. And I think for me, it's quite impressive to see that even if you have it in your mind, somehow it will happen in some shape or form. And that's quite interesting.
Absolutely. And I have two questions and one statement that came out of that. I've been a certified life coach since 2015. And one of the things that I teach a lot of people who are creatives or entrepreneurs or just individuals who want to do something is sometimes we get caught up in the how, and the how can stop us before we even start. But sometimes we just have to get out of how and make sure that it turns out. However it turns out, it's where we need to be more focused. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because there is opportunity in just saying, okay, I have a vision. I may not know how I'm going to get to the end, but as long as I start it, we'll get there. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up, because it's important for people to know. And when it comes to like your audience, and you mentioned how you're able to sometimes maybe connect your guests with another guest, a collaboration, which is something that we are all about. How did you discover, if you have discovered, like the audience that's listening to you, and what has been like your biggest aha moment in the fact that there are people from the States, from Switzerland, that have tuned in?
I think it's probably also through social media. I have to be honest, the only platform I was familiar with until I started podcasting was LinkedIn. I really like the way it work and it's compatible with my way of doing things and my way of being. But I also ventured into the other platforms like Instagram and Twitter, and that has been like a major learning. And that's where I also noticed how people interact around podcasts as well. And coming back to your question about the US audience, I realized that with Twitter, it's a whole different conversation. It's a whole different approach and how people talk, and how you need to be constantly there. You need to also, it's not about promoting yourself, but it's about being part of discussion. And for me, that has been quite challenging, because it's not a way of thinking, or at least a way of working, of being that I have been introduced to before. So I think that part of being more familiar with what's happening on social media and how people are communicating has also informed of, okay, how can I improve maybe my introductions on the podcast, call to actions, how does it work in the newsletter, for instance. So I've tried to adapt that as much as I can, really learning from what the people are saying out there as well. And I think it's a continuous learning. I don't think I'm really like finished with it. And like you were saying before, sometimes you don't know the how, but also sometimes you have to decide, okay, where do I prioritize things and how do I continue to communicate? So for me, there are two aspects there. It's like coming back to social media, which channels or which platforms will I focus on? And for that, I also need to see where is most engagement, where people are more interested. And then the other thing is, okay, this is all great, but I can't do everything on my own. Who can support me on the team who is going to be more social media, how do I say, native or digital native more than me for some platforms? And let's try if that's going to work or not. And if we see that this is going to bring us added value in the way we create the content. So it's a constant learning. I think that's probably the thing for people who are listening and watching, is that you shouldn't come in and say, okay, I'll have this idea. Once it's out there, this is how it's going to work. You need to be open to constantly change. It's like movement, right? If I can make a parallel, it's like in life. You start as a kid, then you're, I don't know, a teenager, and then you're an adult. You're never going to be the same person all your life. But still it's you. So you have to adapt to circumstances and so on. And that's for me something that I like, but it's quite challenging because even for my mind or for my brain, I'm constantly thinking about new things and then I have to test them. But it's interesting. It's an interesting process because the more you speak to people and the more you get to also be part of like groups and collectives, you quickly learn from others what works and what doesn't work. And depending on your objective or your goal, they can also suggest what would be more efficient to reach what you want to do, basically.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And based on your experience, it's this opportunity to stay in the learning, stay in the question and being inquisitive and curious about it. And also recognizing and respecting that it's a craft, right? That you want to do your best, whatever measurement of success you have of yourself and your podcast, that's the commitment. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And again, my hope is that aspiring and podcasters who have been doing this for a while gain insight and courage and inspiration from stories like yours, because it is important that we understand that this is an evolving space that we're in, but we're also evolving. So that's great. It works out. Yeah. So you mentioned that you are a scientist by trade.
Yes.
Much of that would you say has informed your approach to podcast?
For sure, I don't want to call it trial and error, but the testing and checking, right? Because that's what you do in a lab, right? You have an experiment, you have this idea or you have a theory, and then you need to check because maybe you've read other publications and you're in this field, and then you want to move the needle a bit further, or you want to check some other assumptions. And that's basically what I was doing is, okay, this is what I want to do. What do I need? I need to know which platform do I need to distribute? Do I need to record, especially if my guests are not in the same room as me? How do I do it? So there's a few set of tools. And then you start, and then you test, and then you see what works, what doesn't work, right? And then you like something, you keep it. But then after a few months or even a year, these things have evolved, so you have to adapt yourself again. So I think that the testing and checking is absolutely what I took from science. I think back to a couple of guests that I had a few months back, this is exactly what they told me as well. And I had never thought of it in that way. They told me that as an entrepreneur, if you have a scientific background, it actually helps you a lot because it's about checking with a market or with your audience. If you're developing a product, how do they react to it? What do they say? And then you go back and then you adapt it, you improve it. And it's exactly the same as doing it in the lab, basically. That would be the easiest answer, I would say.
That's great. And just like yourself and podcasters to interview, this has been something that I've learned something from you just now. And I did another interview with a lawyer, and she uses her background and her education to support her in the podcasting, sales, and marketing. And I'd always thought about transferable skills for podcasting from a media standpoint. But now, just talking to you and her, I've realized that there are other professions and educational areas that actually help you be successful at podcasting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And probably even more. Probably if someone has another background, was a cook or a chef or something, I don't know, even an artist. That's the thing also I think we should speak more about, or at least encourage even the younger generation, is to say, even if you learn one thing, it doesn't set you up for just doing that one thing, and then it's just one skill for that. In fact, as an individual, we have so much more resources than we think. We can also, and resilience is something important, and something you learn is absolutely transferable in any other situation. At least that's my belief, and that's what I like to think and encourage people to think that way.
Yeah, you're an example of it. So it's real.
True.
Just thinking back and within the 2 years, what will be your biggest win for your podcast?
For me, I think without a doubt, the biggest win was being recognized with award nominations. First of all, the very first one, because the first 6 months, the first season, at some point I had to make it a season because I didn't have any content anymore. But I just said, okay, it's good. Make an opportunity from a challenge, right? I was like, okay, I don't have any people to speak more. Okay, let me do it first season, and then I'll work in the background and come back after a couple of months. And just this first 6 months, I did everything on my own. And I randomly found out about International Women Podcast Awards, and I submitted a couple of things and I was nominated. And for me, it was almost like a shock, because I was like, okay, I think what I'm doing is good, but to be recognized by people who are doing this professionally, okay, it means something. So I'm absolutely onto something here. And then the following year, I think they received 3 times more entries, but still I made it as well to the shortlist. So it, for me, was also a testament that, like we were saying before, like we're evolving. So I've been able to adapt and still produce and create good value, good quality content. So that was also a good encouragement for me. But the other thing is, I probably alluded to that before, so many of my guests have been also ambassadors, if you will, for the show. So, it's always like a gamble, because even though someone accepts to come on the show, it can be this like one-off and it's all conversation and it's done. But sometimes it's, oh, this was great, this was amazing. And sometimes people even realize, my God, through this conversation, I didn't know I was going to talk about this. I didn't know it's going to be like this. And that's where you realize that listening to people, in fact, is super important, and giving them like the space just to show the interest and ask these questions. Because in the beginning, I thought, okay, I need to have the same set of questions just to show like the same journey for everyone, so people can recognize the whole process. And then I was a bit doubtful, because I thought maybe for this person, I'd like to know more about this and that. But that happens organically, actually, as long as you have the scaffold and people are so open to speak and just listening to them and having that feedback alone. And for me, it was super encouraging, but it's also, okay, you're on the right path. Just keep on. And those were, I think, quite interesting wins for me. And I learned as well a lot from being part of a community or a collective of podcasters. The power of the collective. I'll never repeat it enough. As much as I focus as well on the individual, knowing yourself and everything, we don't live on our own. We live in relation with others. And the power of the collective is just tremendous. It's beyond what you can imagine, really.
Absolutely. Listen, I can completely concur with that conclusion. It really is. And that's the whole point, right? Is to continue our work with the support of others and being in contribution to others, as well as allowing them, giving yourself permission to be contributed to. So I love that. One of the questions in the submission form, and we've been going organically, and I enjoyed that. One of the questions in the submission form was about how podcasting has changed your life. And you've talked about it in certain ways, but if there's anything definitive that you want to share in the way in which it has expanded or changed your worldview or whatever it is.
It's actually a good question. And has it changed? Maybe it has confirmed a few things. From, again, like I said before, like working in networks, collective for sure, but also putting yourself out there, whatever idea you have, even if you don't know how you're going to make it. And it's more of trusting yourself and trusting what you can contribute to, even if maybe so many other voices, including yours, depending on, the education and so on, and society, pressure from society, even if you think, yeah, no, it's not worth it. Maybe some people are doing better than me. Honestly, it's worth it. Even be prepared, it's not easy, but the fact that you know why you're doing it is enough to hold you through that. And for me, podcasting, perhaps if I'd done something else, I would have learned the same thing, but at least podcasting has shown that, is that having this idea and thinking, okay, maybe I can make this, I just need to try. Put yourself out there. As I always say, just try, put one step forward. Like I say, we were all born the same way. No one was speaking when they were born. No one could walk or run. We had to learn, right? Step by step. So you have to start somewhere. I think that's really one of the biggest learning, is to say, it's at least not a learning, but at least a proof of what I thought before, is that through podcasting, it just shows that whenever you have an idea, you just have to try it. Worst case, it doesn't work, or at least that idea doesn't work, so you can try another idea. So look at it positively if you can, but really put yourself out there, and you'll be even amazed to see how many people you will attract and how your idea will even evolve to something you probably didn't think of before. So that's one thing that's had a great impact on what I'm doing right now.
All right. Thank you for sharing it. That's great. Something came up for me that just became a curiosity. And that is talking to like family and closest friends about, I have a podcast. One of the things that we we are often struggling to do is get people to, one, understand that podcasts, like I watch YouTube and television. What are you talking about? And the radio. So I was curious for you, like even with your family or close friends, when you first said, listen, I'm going to start a podcast, or I have a podcast now, what has been their reaction to you having a podcast?
It's pretty funny that you asked that. I never asked myself that question. I just said, okay, I'm working on this project. Okay, what's that project? And I had some quite good and interesting feedback in the beginning, although I could tell from whether I was speaking to someone or looking at someone, like, okay, this is good, but where are you going with this? What's the point? Are you going to make money? So what? Is it like just a side thing and then you like it? Or so it's more on the part of wondering what's your ultimate goal. You can share stories, you can do interviews, but what is that going to bring for you ultimately as a person? Are you going to live out of it or not? So yeah, hopefully, let's see if we can have sponsors or whatever, if we can have memberships. This is also one of the goals for this year for the podcast. But I think it's more like wondering, okay, let me first listen and try to understand what you're doing, but I'm not sure I'm following you right now. So you just need to continue, feed them with the episodes, and then ask for some feedback. And lots of people were quite surprised actually at the caliber of guests that I had and the stories that they were sharing. So then you could see suddenly the spark and say, oh, wow, okay, I see the value added you're bringing here. I see what you're contributing to. But it's probably a leap of faith. And yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. That just came up curiously, and so I figured you'd have a great story around that. You mentioned the expansion and membership. So go into that. What is your vision for the podcast as you move into this year and beyond?
Yeah, so one of the objectives of the goal this year is really to build this membership community. I think it's quite a challenge, but the thing is, I see that you can also add value in terms of bringing the type of content you can share and the access you can bring. Because something I noticed quite early, but I didn't want to go into it deeply, was people listen to what you do, but in fact, people are interested in you yourself. Not necessarily, they might like the content or not, but they want to understand you, why. And I had a bit of not trouble because my idea was to say, I want to showcase people. I don't want to speak about me. Even the way I ask questions, I don't want to put too much of my personal interpretation in there. So I think once I've established that, I'm trying to open up a bit more and to say, okay, yeah, who is Claire? Having interviews. We even had like special episode in December where a former guest actually interviewed me. And I think with the membership as well is bringing access more to the behind the scenes, right? Access to me. Why am I doing this? What the topics are coming afterwards? Who am I speaking to? What's the whole process? And I think that brings a lot of value. And having membership is also interesting in that sense to expand and also giving people like additional content. Right now, I'm working on a different format where I want to do more of a mini series or short series. And I would have several guests instead of having one guest per episode. But then because all these interviews have taken place, you have additional content. So you can give that and share that. And it's all this way of, like you were saying before, I haven't thought of marketing in that sense or adding value. And these are new things that are coming in. And I'm trying to build in story by story with a community and a membership community. I think this is something that might really work well. And the other thing is, and that's even more ambitious, but you have to try, right? I used to say that there was this amazing commercial on French TV a few years back, which was about lottery. And they would just say, it was a very short commercial, that 100% of winners tried their luck. So basically, if I don't try my luck, I don't know if I'm going to win or not. So my second goal, I would say, is to become really also the go-to podcast or platform for brands or networks who want to share their narrative, right? To share what is their purpose, why do they do what they do, and really having this whole idea of the values that are really in parallel to what we do. If you're a brand and you want to share your story in this medium, because I think audio medium, whatever happens, is here to stay. Storytelling has started way before radio. People were speaking to each other. We had radio. Now we have lots of other media. It's going to be here for a while. And I think brands and networks, perhaps networks of startups and so on, can really benefit from that. And positioning the podcast as such, as a platform where you can share your narrative in your own words, I think that's something I really like to try and test, and I'm confident that it can work. So we'll see.
It absolutely can work. There's a lot of opportunities inside of podcasting, which is one of the great aspects of podcasting, that it can move into so many different directions, and there's so many ways in which to capitalize. But let it be organic. Let it be where you want to go with it and not where anyone says it should go or it needs to go. So I appreciate that. And I know, like I said, that there's going to be folks that hear them. It's going to be an aha moment for them. So that's great. Any podcasts before you started or as you move your own podcast forward that have inspired you or influenced the way in which you approach podcasting?
Oh, there's been a lot. I think I won't be good at giving you a list, but I would say that one that I discovered perhaps a year ago or so is from an African American journalist. I think she's African American and from Southern Africa, from Zimbabwe, I think, if I'm not mistaken. It's called Our Body Politic, and she's a journalist. And the thing I like about that is that it's all about politics, economics, and so many other different topics that really influence society. But she's looking at it from the angle of Black women. What is their experience of that and how do they impact that? And I really like it because you don't see that approach in media in general. And the fact that there's this platform and she's a journalist herself and all this conversation, and again, it ties back to what I was saying before. For me, it's really important to have also that individual and that personal lens, because it helps me a lot get into different topics that might be very complicated, like politics and so on. Obviously, she's based in the US, so it's very US focused, but still, it's very good because it changes the way I think of things or situations. And it's obviously something that you can translate in other contexts as well. Her name is Chidea, I think. And it's really amazing because she touches upon so many things. And I really like the fact that, Black women use your voice and just share your experience and see and tell everyone how you impact as well society. So I really like that one.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very familiar with Farai. I read a book of hers back when I was probably in high school, and I love the agency that she takes about Black women. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else that you want to promote or speak about before I let you go?
I would invite really any listeners or anybody who is curious about the show to just tune in and join the membership community as well. We're on Patreon. We just started recently, but it's really a great platform. And I think people in the US are quite familiar with that. So just listen to the show. And we have actually a new format coming up for February and March. So like I said before, testing and trying and see what comes out. So I've been doing up until now individual interviews for each episode. And the idea now was to say, okay, let's look at a topic. In this case, I'm looking at sustainable food systems. I've been speaking to over 10 people, different people, and I'm going to cluster that into different topics, different themes over the course of 2 months and 4 episodes. And the idea is that people just tune in, tell the team what you think about the format and how you like it. Because I think it's also an interesting way to vent yourself regularly, even still along the lines of what you want to communicate, but offer also different formats, because probably you can attract different audience as well. But the membership community is definitely something that I'm working on this year, one of the goals as well. And whoever is interested, just I think we'll have the links, right, to, to the podcast. Just reach out, and always open to discuss and exchange ideas. And you never know. Every business starts with a conversation, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of that, and I love that because it's a different way of doing the podcast. And this is, I'll say it again, the opportunity and the possibility inside of podcasting. It does not have to look one way. In fact, it shouldn't. If we're going to absolutely disrupt the way in which media and the way in which we express ourselves, we have to do these new things. We have to try out different ways to reach people, because we are changing as a society. No matter what society you're in and cultures that you're in, we are changing. And it's important that we are doing things in a way that meets us where we are, instead of doing it the same way. If we do it the same way, people, we will continue to do it the same way. So we got to do it different. So I love that. And so to your point, we will definitely have all links and everything in the description. So please tell everyone where they can find you, find the podcast, and also find you.
So the podcast, we have our own website. It's narratives-purpose.podcastpage.io. It's quite long, but otherwise you can just type in whatever research engine you have, Narratives of Purpose. We're also on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And myself, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's the best way and easiest way you can reach me. And it's Claire Murigande. So Murigande.
Thank you. Anything else you want to talk to the folks? Anything you want to impart on anybody? The floor is yours.
Actually, I'd like to thank you because this initiative you had is really great. And the fact that I'm part of it, for me, is amazing because I'm not based in the US, right? And I'm part of the African diaspora in Europe. And I think it's really amazing that you're amplifying all these voices. Black podcasting can take different shapes and forms, can be in different places. And thank you for creating this space, for sharing what independent creators can do. So I'm really excited to listen to the 27 other creators you've been speaking to. And by the way, how was that experience for you to speak to all these people?
It's been amazing. And one of the things that, to your point, wanting to amplify is that there is a lot of brilliance, in our diaspora, period. You just ended with that. A lot of genius and innovation inside of that. The fact that there is a passion here and also these zones of geniuses that we can actually highlight is so important because that's who we are and we get to show off as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to close this out and I'll just ask you to stay right there for me. All right.
Sure.
I want to give a big thanks to our Afros in Audio and Black podcast community for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcasters Association, the link will be in the description below. And if you want to join us at the 5th annual Afros in Audio Podcast Festival, visit bit.ly/AFAU FAQ, also in the description. Follow us on all social media channels at Afros in Audio. And thanks again, Claire, for being a part of Afros in Audio's first ever Black History Month interview series. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.